tongues sound like?
Broken tongues sound like?
Today, I speak to you, knowing what sounds, force like, out of mouths, sounds like, under Americanized couches, under colonized soil, obstructed from seeing the light of day, through lineages of conformity, for fear that they will hyper-realize your marginalized identity. Today I speak to you, knowing what homes feel like, as they are being ripped apart. Today I speak to you, knowing what hand-shoving policies, in between families, and detention centers, shipped and packaged into boxes, cages, and without return addresses, imported into other countries, feel like. Today, I speak to you, knowing that history repeats itself. It might look as if there's a new political agenda on the table today. But it has existed in the past. But today, I want to console you, remind you that the same bodies who have been constantly marginalized and criminalized have been for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is not an isolated incident. To only America. This happens abroad and internationally. Black bodies have been facing mass genocide since the conception of their identity. Know all too well the parallels of history, transcontinental slave ships. Indigenous bodies have been facing mass genocide. White Europeans came across oceans and sold their land. Slaughtered their people. And reduced them to percentages that don't recognize their their past history. Asian immigrants have faced generations unfair servitude to capitalist societies that won't see them or let them in. Women know what it means to be seen as objects, tools, as subcategories to a male-dominated society. LGBTQ individuals know all too well what it means to be beaten on streets. Muslims and other religions other than Christianity know all too well what marginalization is. Now a lot of you today know all these things. And advocate for these issues. You don't do so on an intersectional lens.
Stanley Crenshaw
in 1993 coined the term intersectionality. This means a concept that multiple layers of social injustice one person's identity are not mutually exclusive. 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 Are layered on top of one another. Are layered on top of one another. For example, a black woman faces misogyny and racism. A black woman faces misogyny and racism. So when you idealize and come together and think about intersectionality. We cannot create sanctuaries on or off campuses until we organize, mobilize around intersectionality. Before we mobilize, organize, and create change, all marginalized bodies must be free. Now is the time. More than ever. To come together. And advocate for international intersectionality. We must start today. I leave you with the message. From Assata Shakur. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love one another. Support each other. We have nothing to lose but our change. We have nothing to lose but our change. Nothing to lose but our change. We have nothing to lose but our change. Nothing to lose but our change. We have nothing to lose but our change. Nothing to lose but our change. We have nothing to lose but our change.